Clara Vuletich. Hello.
Hello.
Let's get comfy, cross our legs. It's very good. So tell me about your TEDx Sydney experience at the Opera House. It's a bit different to here at Barangaroo. What was that like?
Oh, wow. I've never done anything like it. It was quite amazing. I was super nervous, but I've never prepped for anything more than I have in my life for that.
Right.
So I spent probably about 4 to 5 weeks prior to it memorising, practicing, pacing up and down. So, yeah, it showed me that preparation counts.
It does count for something when you're telling a story. Actually, it was funny, in the TEDx highlights film that we just watched before, you mentioned an interview after you did your talk that your partner said, "Oh, just imagine everybody's nude." So what's going through your head right now?
Yeah, well, I need to just have a little look around, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. And what about the experience being on a stage like that to raise awareness for how we think about our clothes, the provenance of our clothes and the journey that it goes through?
Oh, because I've sort of spent the last 4 to 5 years in research and academia, mainly in the UK, so it's so good to kind of get out and sort of talk about these issues, you know, with people who buy and sell and wear clothes, and we're the ones in our sort of daily lives who are making those decisions about, once I've finished or fallen out of love with this garment, what am I doing with it? And in the shop, standing at the rack, trying to decide, do they buy something?
Yeah.
You know, these are the kind of things going on in our heads and the behaviours that are really interesting.
You've influenced me. I've got to admit, I haven't bought an item of clothing since May.
Really?
Yeah. Actually, that's a total lie. I have only bought one jacket, but it was also, I've actually started to really think very clearly and carefully about, well, let's not go and shop for a new T-shirt. Just think a bit more clearly. Don't use so much.
It's true. It's almost like you just take a deep breath and you stand in that moment and you just think about it. It's kind of simple in some ways.
Yeah. So I've got a bag of clothes at the moment, however, I hate to admit it, that I need to recycle. And oftentimes I'll go and take it to a charity or something like that. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this ends up in landfills. So what is the reality of how we, here in Australia, dispose of our clothes?
So, I guess before we dive into that, the big picture is that globally we are buying so many more clothes than we were. So we don't have Australian statistics, but globally the amount of clothes we're all buying individually per year has gone up from 7 kilos to 10 kilos.
Really?
In 10 years. So it's, 30% increase. So there's just more amount being produced, bought and then discarded. So we've got that issue, which is obviously what Garth's kind of talking about, this huge increase in waste, and textiles is a part of that.
And you talked about that in your talk. So we have this kind of disposable attitude as well. You buy it, and because you can get something cheaply, you can chuck it out, get something else.
Yes, $5 T-shirts. So there's that. So there's more of a need because there's more going into landfill. And I guess the other thing you need to think about with textiles and landfill is there's 2 types of waste. There's pre- and post-consumer waste for textiles. Pre-consumer textile waste is what industry, so people who are the producers who are making our fibres in Australia and garment production, they'll have some waste which they are paying, I guess, waste management collectors, and that's getting dumped in landfill. And then you've got post-consumer textile waste. So that's, you and me, our clothes, we make decisions around what we do with them when we're finished. We either throw them in the bin or we give them primarily to the charity shops, and in Australia a lot of the second-hand collections are done by the third sector, like the Smith family and St Vincent's. I've noticed in the UK there seems to be a lot more private companies who are part of this textile waste management, but not so much here in Australia. And then they're doing several things. They're collecting these garments, they're either reselling them through their retail stores, they're sending a lot overseas and selling them on the overseas market. About 15% of what they collect gets turned into industrial waste, and then apparently 25% of what they've collected goes to landfill.
Right.
So we don't have a lot of stats in Australia on the amount of textiles going to landfill. This is a study that really needs to be done.
Okay.
Because it hasn't been done.
This is what you should be doing the study.
Well, I don't know whether I'd be good at that, but somebody needs to.
Okay.
But, there's obviously so much more work being done in the UK and the US on this, but there is a few statistics on the Australian Bureau of Statistics website that says about 500,000 tonnes of textiles is going into landfill in Australia.
God, that's just insane. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And so the textiles go into landfill. It's either the clothes that we don't want anymore that can't be resold, in the bin or in the pit, I suppose.
Yep.
And as you said, it's the manufacturing waste that goes into landfill.
Yep.
What happens when it's in there amongst everything else?
Yeah.
The dead dogs, as we
Yes.
discussed before.
Yes.
How do they decompose?
Yeah, a lot of people say, oh, but you've got wool and cottons, which are natural fibres, and they decompose or they go in compost. And they do when you've got the ideal compost situation, which is, we know, for example, that if you put an organic cotton t-shirt in a really good compost bin, just one, it takes between 3 to 5 months it does completely decompose. But, the textiles in landfill are not in the ideal situation. They're all mushed up with
Everything
metal and all the other things. So they're not decomposing. And we know that, for example, apparently wool, when it does decompose, it emits ammonia and methane gas. So, and just textiles in landfill in general are, there's a leachate that causes pollution to the groundwater.
So it depends on the type of the material and if it's polyester or cotton or if it's been manufactured overseas in other countries. Are there differences as well between those types of fibres?
Yeah, polyester takes much longer to decompose. Someone's told me once that polyester is a plastic. Apparently it takes a few hundred years to go anywhere.
It's a few hundred years.
But
if you're an archaeologist finding something in years to come,
exactly.
You go, hey, I've got some clothes here.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing that's also interesting, for example, about polyester is that it's actually the one fibre at the moment that we can completely recycle through a chemical fibre process. So a lot of people speak very badly about polyester because it's made...
But you can use it again.
But you can actually recycle it in a quite highly industrial process.
And what's the end result for that polyester? What happens
More
to it?
polyester.
More polyester.
Yeah. or PET. The other thing is we can make polyester fibre from PET bottles.
Really?
Yeah, there's a great company called Reprieve in the US who are doing that.
Okay, so there is some really great initiatives and inventions that are finding ways to reuse those clothes that normally would go into landfill, that would become the toxic leachate, that are actually making some great steps. That's good. Are you wearing any of these tonight, Clara?
No, just vintage. So I guess the other thing is, just either buy second-hand or really think about, what you're buying and then cherish what you own. Long life. We talk about long life.
Yeah, buy things that you want to keep. That makes a lot of sense to me as well. So what are the innovations when it comes to fibres overseas? If Australia is a bit behind the game, I'm going to hazard a guess here. What about overseas, US, UK?
Oh, there's amazing stuff. So I guess the kind of buzzword at the moment in the UK and the US in sort of sustainable textiles is closed-loop fashion. So that's what everybody's talking about, and I did my research connected to a Swedish project, and the Swedish are amazing on this. So they
they always are. Those Swedes.
Well, apparently, so they had their industry around paper making has gone to China mainly. So they had a lot of issues with these paper mills that they wanted to do something with. So they want to turn these paper mills into textile paper fibre factories. So anyway, they put a lot of money into a project that I was funded for my PhD with. But they're also pioneering, for example, how to completely recycle cotton garments. We haven't been able to recycle cotton very well in the past, but now they've invented a technology where they can recycle a cotton garment down, and they actually add a kind of a solution, and they chemically recycle it, turn it essentially into a wood pulp, and then it gets made up into a kind of new type of rayon viscose. But, they're going to build a factory, and they're going to take these clothes, cotton clothes that the Smith family are collecting. Yeah. They can take those, take the trimmings off, mush it down chemically, and they can actually turn it into new fibre.
That's amazing.
So let's be building that in Australia.
Yeah, so we need more of those innovations.
Yeah,
we need to invest in these types of projects here in Australia as well. I would buy a cotton shirt that had been mushed up and then rehashed. Yeah. There you go, that sounds good. Yeah. So basically, to get back to what we just talked about before, what is it that we can really do? The thing that you just mentioned was to cherish your clothes. You don't need to buy so many. Is there anything else that we can do?
Sadly, again, in Australia, there's just not the options for consumers for much. I know, for example, I don't normally like to talk about particular brands, but there is one brand who's come here from Sweden, H&M, and they have got a new closed-loop recycling initiative, so you can actually return your clothes to them, and they're going to go and do what I've just described.
Right.
So there's more retailers and brands starting to actually initiate these closed-loop systems, so it's not left to government to do, or to us as consumers. So that's rightly or wrongly.
So it's also up to us to actually ask of that from our retailers. Yeah, so we actually have that power, the agency, to go and say, let's do something about this as well. This is all such good stuff here on our first salon. Would you please thank our TEDx Sydney alumni, Clara Vuletich.